A day ago, Britain lost its sixth prime minister in a decade. To make sense of where the country stands as of now, I'm joined by Professor Sir John Curtice. For nearly 3 decades, nobody has read the twists and turns of British elections like you have done. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Curtice. After an extraordinary 24 hours, the UK has seen, right? And I'll begin with the sheer churn. Six prime ministers gone in a decade, not one leaving on their own term. According to you, sir, has British politics simply become ungovernable or is something deeper breaking here?
If you could find a common thread that helped to explain these six resignations, then you might have a point. And while there is a bit of a common thread, the honest truth is a lot of them are very particular. So let's go through each of them. The resignation of David Cameron in 2016 is clearly occasioned by Brexit, having led the referendum campaign to remain inside the European Union, and then having lost, he resigned straight away. Equally, Theresa May, her resignation in 2019, that's occasioned by the fact that she is unable to come up with a Brexit deal that she can get through the House of Commons, and eventually she has to give up on that endeavour. But then if we come to Boris Johnson in 2022, that frankly has nothing to do with Brexit and everything to do with the fact that Conservative MPs had finally concluded that Mr. Johnson's relationship with the truth was too loose and too unacceptable. Liz Truss, just a few months later, well, that's basically as a consequence of the fiscal policies that she decided to pursue without much in the way of civil service advice, and as a result spooked the markets. Yeah, Rishi Sunak didn't resign on his own terms, but he chose the date of the election that he lost. And, we expect prime ministers to change hands at election time. So I'm not sure that one really should be any concern. In the case of Keir Starmer, well, it's a bit mixed. I mean, on the one hand, at the end of the day, why are Labour in the difficulties they are? Well, you can argue it's partly as a consequence of some of the weaknesses of Sir Keir Starmer as a politician, in particular, the way in which he struggled always to come up with a narrative, a story about what his government was about, and therefore to give it some semblance of a sense of direction and of leadership. But yeah, sure, what is also true, as he himself said, is that the reason why his parliamentary party lost confidence in him is because they don't think he can lead them back to be able to defeat reform at the next election. And support for reform is very heavily tied up with attitudes towards Brexit. So it's arguably his political failings that are the principal issue, but because of his political failings, there are then doubts about his ability to deal with a challenge from a very heavily pro-Brexit party. But, 2.5 out of 6 is the common theme. I mean, I think what I would say, there is probably something else going on. And this actually is arguably a 50-year trend. And that is that parliamentarians, MPs, are now more likely to be assertive. They're rather less likely to follow the party line. There were some of the first major rebellions in the post-war period happened during the 1970s, particularly over immigration under the government of Edward Heath between 1970 and 1974. And gradually, one parliament after another, MPs have tended to become more rebellious. And that does therefore also mean that, yes, sometimes MPs are not willing to follow the party line, and that can help to bring a prime minister down. So David Cameron wasn't brought down by his MPs. That was the referendum. Theresa May was arguably brought down by MPs because of divisions within her party. Boris Johnson was definitely brought down by his own MPs, as was Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak, it's the electorate. And again, David Cameron, I'm sorry, Sir Keir Starmer, his own MPs. So I think it's the greater assertiveness of MPs that if there's a common thread. And insofar as government, well, yeah, governments are, at the end of the day, prime ministers retain office for so long as they retain the confidence of the House of Commons. And arguably, it's got a wee bit more difficult to retain the confidence of the House of Commons because if MPs now think that things are going wrong, they're less likely to be loyal.
So, why do you think that Starmer, who was chosen with that kind of thumping majority, where did he
Oh,
win the last?
let me just stop you there. Right,
Okay.
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 Reason why Sir Keir Starmer got a thumping majority is everything to do with the electoral system and nothing to do with the level of electoral support that he got. The crucial thing you have to know is that his party only got 35% of the vote in Great Britain, 34% across the UK as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
That is the lowest share of the vote that has ever been won by a majority government, a government with any kind of parliamentary majority in the UK. It was the electoral system that then turned that into a very big majority. Why? Why, essentially, because reform, and this is the whole irony, reform took 25% of the 2019 Conservative vote. In doing that, they depressed the Conservative vote in constituency after constituency. And that, together with a certain amount of anti-Conservative tactical voting, where Labour was second
Right.
to the Conservatives, gave the Labour Party a whole barrel load of seats, way more than they otherwise would have got, around nearly 100 or so. And bear in mind also that Labour's vote was actually going down in many constituencies they were trying to defend. And what was also then was, for those of us who kind of looked underneath the headlines, this indeed has now become known as a rather loveless victory.
Mm-hmm.
That the public, Starmer was not popular at the time of his election. They didn't know what he stood for.
Mm-hmm.
And the public seemed to be basically, yes, they wanted to get rid of the Conservatives, but they weren't clearly embracing Labour. So the potential weaknesses in Starmer's position were evident in that
Okay.
July election. You
Mm-hmm.
just needed to look beyond the 412 seats the Labour Party managed to win.
So let us come to the man who could be the man of the moment, Andy Burnham. Is he the
Yeah.
next British PM now? Is he the next
Yes.
Prime
Yeah.
Minister?
I think there's very little doubt about that. Um, having managed to win Makerfield so well, Labour MPs at least are hoping that he has a broader ability to be able to take the challenge to reform and thereby, frankly, to rescue their parliamentary careers. Many of them are concerned at the moment they're going to lose at the next election to reform. Now, losing their seat is in itself not what they want. Losing it to reform from their perspective would make it even worse. That's what they're trying above all to avoid. And they're hoping that Burnham has an ability to appeal more broadly across the electorate as a more effective communicator than Keir Starmer, and somebody who has certainly got much higher level of popularity than Keir Starmer has, that he will be able to turn the party's fortunes around. The gamble, of course, they're taking is how good a job he will do of the actual day-to-day work of being Prime Minister, of actually finding policies that actually generate economic growth, turn around the health service, etc. And it's quite a big step up from being a widely acknowledged, relatively successful mayor of Greater Manchester to running 10 Downing Street. It's a kind of step up quite a few ladders, a few rungs of a few ladders. And that's what we don't know. But given that his success in Makerfield, they now seem to be buying into this. And that while there's talk about a couple of people possibly challenge him, the truth is we already know enough about the attitudes of the Labour Party membership. It's very, very difficult to believe that even if it were to go to a contest, that anybody would be able to defeat Andy Burnham. And I suspect in the end, nobody will be standing against him. And that by July the 17th, we'll probably have a new Prime Minister.
So this is just a question from a curious
Mm-hmm.
audience, the kind of a thing. Do you think that Labour could throw up a surprise like they've done on several occasions, like choosing somebody? Can Labour throw up a surprise candidate for the Prime Minister's role other than Andy Burnham? Is that a policy? Is that a remote
No.
possibility?
It's Mr. Burnham. There is nobody else who is, the one person who might have stood and who could at least made a fist of an electoral fight. But again, the polling evidence was that he would lose quite heavily is West Streeting. But West Streeting has done a deal with Andy
Yeah,
Burnham.
they've already done a
So
deal. Yeah.
I mean, the downfall of Keir Starmer is not a surprise. And the success of Andy Burnham is not a surprise. This has been something that looked not unlikely for at least the last 12 months.
So, what's your thought about Nigel Farage, Reform Party? Because a question that I have is that uh, basically for over a year, one party has led every poll, and it is it Labour or Conservatives. It's Nigel Farage Reform. Has Britain stopped noticing that next PM might not come from either of the two parties that have run the country for a century? Is that a possibility there?
Well, given our current electoral system, the answer to that is yes, it is perfectly possible. I mean, the truth is that none of our political parties now is particularly popular. Um, the least popular of the major five is at 12%. The most popular Reform is at 27%. And that's all it's at. It's at just 27% of the vote. But it so happens it still has a 7-point lead over its nearest competitors, Labour. And under our first past the post electoral system, that can still, perhaps it's kind of fairly close, might just get him to 326 seats. Certainly, Reform will be the largest party by quite some distance, and probably very difficult for stop Nigel Farage being Prime Minister. But it's 3 years to the next election. An awful lot of water has got to flow underneath an awful lot of bridges before we know where we're at. And obviously, the Labour Party is now hoping that they will be able to take the fight to reform. But equally, also the Conservative Party, who also won a parliamentary by-election against the grain of the polls last week, and whose leader, Kemi Badenoch, is becoming not unpopular with the public. They're going to be hoping that they will be able to also take the fight to Farage. And at the end of the day, it's the Conservative Party who have lost most out to reform. And if reform are going to go down in the polls, it's unlikely to happen unless the Conservative Party recovers. Labour loses seats to reform, and it does lose some votes, but recently it's been losing more votes to the Greens than the Democrats. It's just that if Reform pick up lots of votes off the Tories, and they pick some up off Labour, and Labour then also lose votes to the Greens, the net effect is that Reform can take a seat from Labour. But that doesn't mean to say that the flow of the vote is necessarily particularly from Labour to Reform. And that's something that Labour MPs some of them have to wrap their minds around.
So, finally, a question, the view from outside, not exactly a question, basically.
Yeah.
For our audience in India and around the world, is what's happening in Britain is a one-off thing, or is it a warning sign for the democracies everywhere, where voters have stopped trusting the mainstream parties? More and more voters are switching to the parties which are not mainstream legacy parties.
Sure, but the answer to is that the UK has been, I mean, of those countries whom we used to call Western Europe. So we're thinking of those places that were democracy before the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. Virtually every single one of those countries has seen major changes in their political parties. If you take Italy, for example, it used to be the Christian Democrats against the communists. No more. Both those parties have more or less disappeared from the Italian political firmament. And France, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, Sweden, they've all seen major changes in their party system. The UK has kind of stood out as a beacon of relative stability. But Brexit has unsettled an awful lot of politics, and it's certainly helping to bring about the fragmentation that we're currently experiencing. And to be honest, none of us knows where Britain is heading politically. That's what makes it interesting. Maybe Nigel Farage will manage to win the election, or maybe Labour and the Conservatives will be able to recover. But what we do know is that both Labour and the Conservatives have a very, very substantial challenge on their hands.
Professor Curtice, thank you. I'll keep it brief because you said that you don't have much of a time. You're in the middle of something.
Yep.
Invaluable as always on the story. That's really only just the beginning. The next few weeks will tell us, like you said, that is it a Labour reset or just the start of something far bigger for British politics, basically. We'll be watching numbers closely and we'll be troubling you with more information. Thank you so much, Sir John Curtice. Thank you for joining us. Lovely
You're
talking
welcome.
to you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.